Before dawn on January the 1st, 1886, 30-year-old Adelaide Bartlett frantically woke her landlord in the Pimlico district of London, announcing her husband had died in the night. While Edwin Bartlett had been ill for a long time, it soon became evident the 41-year-old had not died of natural causes, and what initially seemed like an open and shut case quickly turned into a sensational murder mystery. Had Adelaide really killed her husband? Before we begin, a message from this episode's sponsor. If you're suffering from the post-Christmas blues, then now is the perfect time to lift your mood with an intriguing puzzle game. That's where Murder in the Alps comes in. The game is an interactive crime novel set in the Alps during the 1930s, wherein you play journalist Anna Myers, whose hotel stay is rudely interrupted by murder. As you progress through the story, you'll meet many interesting characters who just might also be suspects. I've enjoyed my time with the game immensely, and it makes a great alternative to doom scrolling through social media or watching the same old Christmas movies over and over again on TV. I was particularly impressed with the artwork and the fact the game also has voice acting across its 12 chapters, packed with puzzles and mini-games. If I had to choose a favourite character, it would have to be the rebel without a cause, Walter. He reminds me of someone, but I can't put my finger on it. Murder in the Alps is free to play on Android and iOS. So, can you solve the murder in the Alps? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to get on the case right away. Much of Adelaide's early life is largely shrouded in mystery. She was born in either Orléans or St. Cloud, France, on December 19, 1855, and her mother was an Englishwoman named Clara Chamberlain. The identity of her father, however, is disputed, though records appear to show that he was a man named Adolphe Collot de la Trémouille, Comte de Troyes d'Escurial. The grand name seemingly came with a grand position, as it appears he was a member of Queen Victoria's entourage. By 1860, Clara and her children had moved to London, England, and in June of that year, Adolphe passed away. 6 years later, he was joined by Clara, who was only 33 years old. It seems that Adelaide was then adopted and later began working as a confectioner's assistant. However, her story really begins the day she was introduced to a prosperous grocer named Edwin Bartlett. Edwin was a businessman who was a partner in a number of grocery stores. He was also said to be spiritual and eccentric. These eccentricities, or indeed the 11-year age gap between the pair, weren't enough to deter Adelaide, and she and Edwin tied the knot on April the 6th, 1875. However, the pair didn't begin their life together as husband and wife straight away. Instead, Edwin sent Adelaide to a boarding school in Stoke Newington and then to a Protestant convent in Belgium to fill the gaps in her education, while he lived alone in a flat above his shop. In 1878, Adelaide finally returned to England, and she moved in with her husband at an address in Herne Hill. At first, life in the Bartlett household seemed to be going well. Edwin's business was flourishing, and the beautiful and smart Adelaide was seen as a perfect wife, although not by everyone. The young woman's father-in-law, Edwin Bartlett Sr., claimed he saw right through her, believing she was having an affair with her brother-in-law, Frederick. It was true that Adelaide didn't have many friends, and because Edwin Jr. worked long hours, she was often alone. Perhaps the young woman sought unorthodox companionship from her husband's sibling. Whether or not the accusations were true, Adelaide denied them, and Edwin believed his wife. The couple even forced Edwin Sr. to sign a written apology, while Frederick, interestingly, moved to the United States. In 1881, the Bartletts went through a traumatic experience when Adelaide gave birth to a stillborn child after a long and difficult labour. Protracted by the fact, Edwin insisted that no doctor be involved in the birth, as he didn't want another man to interfere with his wife. Afterwards, Adelaide told her husband she never wanted to become pregnant again, and Edwin did not object. She would later state that their marriage was strictly platonic. Despite the apparent issue Edwin had with men around his wife, one man he seemingly trusted was George Dyson. Edwin and Adelaide were very religious, and in 1885 the 27-year-old Dyson was their local Wesleyan minister. The two men soon became close friends, and Adelaide and George were a lot closer than that. Edwin hired the minister to tutor his wife in Latin, mathematics, history, and geography. So teacher and pupil often spent the whole day together at the Bartlett home while the head of the house was at work. A maid would later say that the pair would behave like a smitten couple. Curiously, Edwin encouraged his friend to have an affectionate relationship with his wife and didn't mind seeing the two sharing kisses. In September, after the Bartletts moved to a room in a house at 85 Claverton Street, Pimlico, Edwin bought George a season train ticket so he could easily visit Adelaide, and allegedly regarded the minister as a co-husband of his wife. That same month, he also changed part of his will that stipulated that his wife could only keep the wealth and items she inherited from him if she remained unmarried. Along with these changes, he also chose a new executor, George Dyson. It was apparently Edwin's desire that after his death, George and Adelaide would be married. It's unclear whether he saw this happening sometime in the distant future, but in truth, Edwin didn't have much time left. In late 1885, Edwin's health suddenly took a turn for the worse. The man's teeth and gums were in terrible condition, as an inept dentist had left him with stumps that were now rotting away under dentures. Because of his foul-smelling breath, and perhaps for some other reasons, Adelaide was no longer sleeping in the same bed with her husband. She was, however, very devoted to taking care of Edwin, more so after Dr. Alfred Leach diagnosed him with gastritis and diarrhea likely caused by mercury poisoning. Some sources mention that Edwin believed he had syphilis, which he was self-treating with mercury, the remedy of choice at the time. Others, however, say Edwin was taking pills for his health problems, but didn't know exactly what they were. Regardless, he wasn't doing well, and his condition continued to deteriorate even after a competent dentist treated his mouth. Adelaide decided they needed to hear the opinion of another doctor, but for a rather curious reason. As she explained, if Mr. Bartlett does not get better soon, his friends and relations will accuse me of poisoning him. When a Dr. Dudley examined her husband, he explained that his gums were still inflamed, but otherwise there was nothing physically wrong with him. Believing he was simply depressed and hysteric, Dr. Dudley recommended his patient get out more. Edwin wasn't convinced. He still felt so ill, he believed he was going to die soon. But then, as the year was coming to an end, Edwin's condition started to improve, and he was slowly getting back to his old self. On December the 31st, 1885, Adelaide accompanied Edwin to yet another dentist appointment and was seen acting very affectionate towards her husband. She even told the doctor she wished she could unmarry Edwin so they could have the pleasure of marrying each other again. The pair celebrated New Year's Eve alone at home. Nobody had contact with the couple from 11:30 p.m. until 4 a.m. the following morning, when a frantic Adelaide stirred Mr. and Mrs. Doggett, the owners of the house, from their sleep. She begged them, "Come down, I think Mr. Bartlett is dead." The Doggetts found Edwin lying face down in the bed. The grocer's body was already cold, indicating he had been dead for some time. There weren't any clear signs of what had caused Edwin's sudden demise, and based on Adelaide's statement, it seemed like her husband had died in his sleep. The couple had gone to bed together, a rare occurrence at the time, and when Adelaide woke up that morning, Edwin was gone. Mr. Doggett did, however, notice a glass on the mantelpiece, which was 3/4 full of liquid that smelled like a combination of brandy and ether. Could it be that Edwin had taken poison to end his suffering? That question was posited to the now widow by Dr. Leach once he arrived to examine the body. She assured the doctor that that wasn't possible, saying she would have noticed if Edwin did such a thing. Certainly a post-mortem examination would conclude he had died of natural causes. But that was not the case. When the grocer's stomach was opened, the very distinct smell of chloroform filled the room. At low doses, chloroform works as an anesthetic and sedative, but in high concentrations, the substance can be fatal. By the end of January, the Home Office analyst had come to the conclusion Mr. Bartlett's untimely demise was caused by the toxic substance alone. The findings shocked George Dyson. The minister had purchased 4 small bottles of chloroform at Adelaide's request only days before the death. She had explained to George that her husband suffered from an internal complaint which his doctor didn't understand. To make Edwin feel more comfortable, she needed chloroform. Strangely, after her husband's death, she changed her story, claiming that despite their agreement to keep the marriage platonic, Edwin had begun to demand that the pair have relations. Whenever the mood took him, she would avoid the encounter by using the chloroform to knock him out. She continued by saying that on New Year's Eve she had not touched the chemical other than to show the bottle to her husband after admitting she had been using the substance on him. She then left the bottle next to the bed on the mantelpiece, but for one reason or another she didn't check the contents in the morning and simply threw the bottle away. While it was possible Edwin had chosen to take his own life, Adelaide's strange story and her relationship with George raised suspicions. Needless to say, Edwin Bartlett Sr. was adamant his son had been killed by his unfaithful wife. George seemed to think the same. After realizing he was connected to a possible murder, the minister told the authorities about the chloroform purchases, simultaneously ending his affair with the widow. Following the coroner's inquest, both 30-year-old Adelaide and 28-year-old George were arrested. But on April the 13th, 1886, at the Old Bailey, the prosecution withdrew its case against the minister, allowing him to be called as a witness in the case against Adelaide. One of the most talented and costly lawyers, Sir Edward Clarke, was brought in to represent the young widow. It was believed at the time that this was due to her mysterious father pulling strings behind the scenes. Though, if it was indeed Adolphe Trémoule, he had long since passed by this point. During the trial, the court soon learned that Adelaide's claim about having a platonic marriage with Edwin wasn't exactly true. The grocer had condoms amongst his belongings. Furthermore, Nurse Annie Walker testified Adelaide had told her she had become pregnant after one time being intimate with her husband without some preventative. During his testimony, George Dyson stated he had never behaved inappropriately with Adelaide and had helped her to get chloroform simply because he thought it would ease her husband's pain. He told the jury his friend had believed he was terminally ill, mentioning that Edwin had some odd ideas. Despite being brought in to help the prosecution, his testimony actually helped Adelaide's case, especially when he mentioned that she had not told him to keep the purchase of chloroform a secret. In addition, Dr. Leach described to the court the good care Adelaide had taken of her husband during his illness. Leach also explained that his patient's hysterical and unbalanced behavior meant he couldn't rule out the possibility that he had taken his own life. There were also several other strange details about the case, such as the fact that despite eating a large meal, Edwin had not vomited after ingesting the chemical. Liquid chloroform also burns skin. However, no burns were found in the dead man's mouth or throat. This pointed to the possibility that he must have drank it quickly, adding to the theory that he may have done so to end his life. And so, even though the prosecution's case made a lot of sense, Adelaide had killed her husband to inherit his property and marry George, they struggled to prove how exactly she had murdered her husband. Sir Edward Clarke also noted there had not been previous murder cases involving the use of liquid chloroform, and it was more likely that Edwin Bartlett had taken his own life or died of a tragic accident. The widow's defense closed by saying, "From the moment of that death, every word and act and look of hers has been the word and act and look of a woman conscious of her innocence." In the end, although many details in the case were damning to her, the jury eventually found Adelaide not guilty of the murder of her husband. The foreman stated, "Although we think grave suspicion is attached to the prisoner, we do not think there is sufficient evidence to show how or by whom the chloroform was administered." After the verdict, and with questions remaining on how the liquid had reached the dead man's stomach without burning him internally, surgeon and pathologist Sir James Paget stated, "Now that she has been acquitted of murder and cannot be tried again, she should tell us, in the interest of science, how she did it." After her release, Adelaide Bartlett returned to Orleans, vanishing from the public eye and taking any answers she may have had to a list of unanswered questions with her. Some even claim that she eventually married George, but we can't say for sure. What we do know, however, is that the debate about what really took place that night continues. Did Adelaide offer Edwin a glass of chloroform-laced brandy as a New Year's toast, or did Edwin purposefully drink the toxic substance? Unfortunately, we will likely never know the whole truth about the Pimlico Mystery. Thank you for watching. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next year with more stories to make you say, "Well, I never."